Thanks everyone for showing up today. We're going to do a webinar about the new VulnDB Vulnerability Integration for ServiceNow. It's going to be myself, Jay Wigard from ITS Partners, and Jake Kouns, the CISO and co-founder of the VulnDB product service itself. We're going to just do some quick introductions, and then Jake is going to talk about the vulnerability response and the vulnerability intelligence landscape as a whole, some of the challenges and the opportunities there. And then once he has done a little bit about that and a little bit about, what makes VulnDB great, then I'm going to do a little bit of a demo of some of the functionality of the actual integration itself, and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jake to do a little intro of himself.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? My name is Jake Kouns, one of the founders of Risk-Based Security. Excited to be here today. I've been long in the industry doing vulnerability intelligence and vendor risk ratings, and pretty excited today to share some of the ways that we look at the world in the vulnerability management space, how we look at things slightly different. And then really to sort of pull it all together with this integration. So quite happy to be here and looking forward to it.
So this is a little bit about my background. I was a senior UI engineer at ServiceNow for a while, and now I am leading product development here at ITS Partners. We've got a couple of store apps that I've worked on and led development for, the ITS Jamf integration and the VulnDB Vulnerability Integration. And then just kind of high level, I've been doing web development about 16 years or so, probably since 2002-ish. So got a lot of experience, in front end development and user experience in general. So
I wanted to start off a little bit today. I promise we're not trying to PowerPoint you to death. There really is a demo at the end of this to show you how this all works. But I want to sort of frame things a little bit here, and I think everyone would agree that they have a security problem, right? Organizations as like this little boat trolling around in the water, and you have problems. Now, depending upon who you talk to, which department within your organization or which vendor might have a solution for you, they may tell you it's a different problem, but we sort of all would agree that we have a problem. And it's a little overplayed with the iceberg sort of analogy, but as you dig in, most security professionals or risk management folks will sit there and start to realize that the problem is actually much bigger than they even could have thought that it would have been. Now, from our standpoint and what we've been doing over the last decade here, being a data intelligence firm, is that we believe the problem is bad data, as you can imagine, right? And when you have bad data, it leads to very bad risk management decisions. So from our standpoint, one of the things we want to talk about today is the sort of state of the union when it comes to vulnerabilities. Now, right now, whether you like it or not, all software has vulnerabilities, right? And there's some debate here about whether all software should have these vulnerabilities, but we continue to see more and more software being put out, and no matter what the software is being used for, we're seeing it have vulnerabilities in there, right? And so when we look at 2018 data alone, we had over 22,000 unique vulnerabilities that we tracked. Now, for most organizations, they rely on CVE and NVD, right? So CVE being sort of the dictionary, right? A government-funded resource run by MITRE that tries to put a unique identifier, right, a CVE ID on each vulnerability. And then on the NVD side, right, this is more of the database side, the National Vulnerability Database, again, a US funded source. Now, most people rely on this, but the fact is it actually is missing over 68,000 vulnerabilities. And I'll say that again, 68,000 vulnerabilities are missing. And this is very true. Now, what's interesting is that sort of translates to 33% of all known vulnerabilities most organizations don't know about, right? So these vulnerabilities are unknown to organizations who rely on CVE and NVD. Now, when we've been telling this story for a while, because this isn't actually something that's just started, it's been going on for quite some time. Most people don't want to believe this, right? The initial responses will be something like, well, I'm sure it's, if it is the case, I'm sure it's in vulnerabilities or in software where the vulnerabilities don't really matter, they're low risk, or it's in software that no one uses and no one cares about, right? Well, I can assure you that it's not the case. The vulnerabilities that are missing are in lots of high-profile software, and also quite a bit of them are very important. In fact, when we did the analysis on the 2018 data, out of the vulnerabilities that were missing, that had no CVE ID and therefore not in NVD, right? 45.5% of them had a CVSS V2 severity-based score between 7 and 10. Now, whether you love or hate CVSS as a severity metric, potentially being used in your prioritization and risk management planning, these vulnerabilities tended to be on the more high and critical side. So we're not talking about things that doesn't really matter if you're unaware of them. Now, the ones that CVE and NVD do track, they're actually days, weeks, and months late when it comes to going through the process. It's quite a convoluted process from the way that a CVE ID will be assigned, right? Then there's a waiting period where it will be in this reserved status. Many of you have probably seen this before, where you go to look at an ID and it's in reserve where there's no information about it. Once that comes out of reserve status, which again can be quite some time, and by the way, some CVIDs never come out of reserve status, then it gets kicked over into NVD, which they kick it over to a provider that they outsource, and then it comes back and we see it again anywhere between 7 to 12 weeks, if not more, delayed, right? So when you think about it, this gets worse. It gets worse when we look at it, because most security vendors also rely on this data, including the vulnerability scanners. If you look at a lot of the reports and a lot of things you're doing, when you see a vulnerability finding, you almost always see something in there that has a CVID. Almost always. There's very rarely a time when there's not. And those tend to be sort of, misconfigurations or certificate issues, things of that nature, which don't get identifiers for them. So it's unfortunate because so many people are using this, you're left in the dark, right? Now, one of the things I find interesting is when you talk about cyber, which we're talking about today, some very normal concepts and things sort of go out the door. People get a little crazy when we talk about cyber, right? So some of you on this call may be thinking, yeah, I don't get what the big deal is, right, about all this missing vulnerability data. But if I was to tell you in maybe a little bit of a different context, if this is my example of the CVE doctor, and I say, trust me, I'm a doctor, and you sort of self-reflect and think about your current doctor, if you have one, and how long you've gone there, and how did you get this doctor, and was it a recommendation, and do you trust your doctor? And then if I told you that, or your doctor even told you directly, hey, you come to see me, and I just want to let you know up front that I am unable to diagnose 33% of any of the health issues that you have. I'm not able to diagnose them for you. And by the way, of those 33, 45% of them are sort of going to kill you, right? They're in the highs and criticals. Furthermore, if I can diagnose your issue, I might not be able to tell you about it right away. And in fact, in some cases, I'm going to tell you about it too late. I'm going to tell you about it a couple months late. And in some cases, it might actually be too late for treatment because something could have happened. And further, one of the most interesting issues here is the diagnosis might actually be super vague and not actually describe the exact issue or provide treatment options. Now, if I sort of could see you all and I would say, hey, would you be okay with this for your doctor? There'd be very few of you that would raise your hand thinking that this is okay. Yet every one of these things is true. I already shared with you about the missing data within CV and NVD, the timeliness of it, and that last point there about the diagnostics being vague. For anyone that's really trying to track root and core vulnerabilities, it can be really hard because sometimes issues described in CVE are too high level and they actually don't track the right thing. It may be a product that says has an issue, but it may be in a third-party library for something else that you need to understand that affects more on your environment or more on your applications. So just something to consider as we talk about this. Now, when you put all this together, one of the things that becomes concerning, we're all playing this whack-a-mole game right now, right? We're all trying to figure out how to prioritize our critical issues, how to determine, we don't want to be reactive. We want to stop playing the whack-a-mole game. There's so many vulnerabilities as it is already that we can't fix. How in the world can we focus on the right things, right? And when you have this bad data, it makes it so you're unable to do this. You're unable to prioritize. And so for us, it sort of rounds it out, right? The solution is better data. And if you had better data, you could make better risk decisions. So for us, in VulnDB, we focus exclusively on better vulnerability data. By far, we're the most comprehensive, complete, and timely vulnerability intelligence available. But it's not just to help play the whack-a-mole game. We actually include all sorts of very extensive metadata, risk ratings, insight, predictive, how often we think vulnerabilities are going to be disclosed, cost of ownership, so you can understand how much money is an open source product costing to maintain securely. We do 5-star crash test ratings, all sorts of really interesting metrics that help security professionals not only sort of move from being hated of always showing up saying, hey, there's more things to fix, but starting to help do the problem management root cause analysis of what are the vendors and the products that are putting me most at risk? What are the vendors and products that are most likely to do data breach? All these sorts of things. So some very, very cool data in here that can not only help with the fixing and the technical aspect, but higher level as well. We've been around for quite some time as a company, used by many leading organizations. A lot of them don't like us to tell who they are, but this isn't our first rodeo. But I got to tell you what we're most excited about, and I promise the demo is just right around the corner here, is that for us, we've always been about having the better data. And what we believe is the evolution of vulnerability management is to not just rely on scanning. Scanning has served most organizations well, and it's still done, without a doubt. But if we look and we work hard to figure out where our assets are in our organization, and we map it to vulnerability intelligence, we're able to elevate and mature the whole vulnerability management process dramatically. If we think about the process of scanning, not everyone likes scanning. There's been some times where it might have caused an issue, a slowdown, an outage. So a lot of big organizations make you put in change controls and wait for time to scan from, you just can't sort of scan during the day or any time that you want to, right? So we know that's a challenge. We know that when it comes down to it, vulnerability and specifically network scanners can't find everything, right? So when a new vulnerability comes out, say today, it can be a slow process in order to get all of that data back and then start to understand what's going on. When you mature and you start focusing more on an asset inventory, the second a vulnerability comes out, whether it's in some sort of operating system or Apache or a third-party library like Struts or OpenSSL or whatever it may be, you're able to do things a lot faster. On day one, you're able to say, show me where in my organization I have this product that's affected. If you know the exact product and version that's impacted, there really isn't a need to scan to see if you have it. And so we've thought this for a very long time. And now working with Jay and his team, being able to have this ServiceNow app where we're able to get the VulnDB data into ServiceNow and pull that asset information in the workflow all in the place that you like and your organization works, it really increases dramatically how you can prioritize, remediate, and move that to the next level. So I appreciate you listening to sort of the problem as we see it and the solution as we see it. And now I think for the most exciting part here, you're going to be able to, Jay is going to be able to show you it in action.
All right, thanks for that, Jake. So what we know, is that vulnerability management, it's difficult and it involves a lot of data. There's a lot of stuff kind of screaming for your attention all at once. So with that in mind, the user experience is really important. So we really try with the integration and with all of our integrations, is to put that user experience, at the forefront of our development. So when we get in here, one of the first things that you'll see is, a guided setup, which is going to be familiar to anybody that's set up, some of the out-of-box platforms and products, or some of the out-of-box products on the ServiceNow platform, like the ITSM guided setup wizard, for example. A lot of these ServiceNow products use this framework, and so we're actually able to leverage that for the guided setup of this integration. So I'm not going to bore you with a lot, with the whole kind of configuration, but if you aren't familiar, basically you've got these kind of progress indicators along the way of where you are, and clicking configure will open up the part of the application that you need to configure. Most of it's going to happen, right in line here. And so this just makes it really simple to work through, the configuration, and to make sure that you didn't miss anything along the way. So that's just going to allow you to really hit the ground running, I guess, and not be kind of wondering what happened, why the data isn't coming through. So yeah, just like a kind of a quick overview of that. As you click on mark as complete, you can see, the progress start to increment higher. And there, now we've got step 3 configured, and so on and so forth. With our last task here being, getting started, which actually is going to take us into the admin portal. So the important stuff, obviously, is the data. So let's take a look at some of these third-party vulnerabilities that are brought in by the system. You can see here, we've got a list view of everything that's filtered, a list view that's filtered down to everything that's brought in by the integration. So this demo instance has 201,000 vulnerabilities from the VulnDB database. If we click into one of these, we'll see a pretty familiar interface for anybody that's done vulnerability response. We've got threat and solution data. We've got the CVSS metrics added right here. And then we've got, so on the familiar side, again, we've got, the vulnerability, or the vulnerable software. So these would be vulnerable versions that are mentioned in this vulnerability. Any vulnerable items that are associated, we don't have any here. This is a demo environment, so we don't have a ton of VITs in here. And then vulnerability references. And then one of the additional adds from from VulnDB's data is these classifications. So we get some additional classifications that can help us to prioritize the work that we're going to actually do. So one of these is VulnDB exclusive. So this highlights ones that are not in the NBD. Another one, we see exploit public, coordinated disclosure, input manipulation, remote network access. So what you can then do is you can potentially prioritize some of your work, by saying, all right, we only care about those where the exploit is public, for example. And then you can drop off, the filter for that single vulnerability to see all of those where the exploit is public. So people know about this exploit, so it's much more likely, to be a vulnerability in your organization. And then you can kind of go from there and filter down which you're actually caring about. I think probably one of the most practical places, actually, before I move on to that, I want to highlight some other stuff that we've got here, because we've got some extra UI actions that get added to the the third-party vulnerability form, which are added by our integration. So we've got VulnDB Details, and this is just kind of like a little bit of a more modern user interface to view that data. It's just something that I think people tend to be more maybe used to, is being able to see everything all in one view, and then you get a little bit of additional data in the timeline here. So you can see, when the exploit was disclosed, when it was actually published, and then when the solution was made available, which are, very valuable data points. Published, last modified up here. Then kind of going back to this form, we also have product analysis. So this is what Jake was talking about, when he was saying that basically you're not just evaluating an individual piece of software, you can evaluate the publisher, the product, to see, how vulnerable is it? What is the total cost of ownership? You can get to see kind of like some more high level data that affects all vulnerabilities, so this particular piece of software has 180 total vulnerabilities, 246 total versions, a code maturity score of 1.04, a lot of different interesting pieces of data down here. And then we've got links out to the actual VulnDB portal where you can subscribe to alerts. If this is a piece of software that's central to your organizational functioning, then you could potentially set up alerts for this and get emails like anytime any new vulnerability is published, which is I think pretty powerful, for something that's very mission critical to you, to be able to kind of have that monitoring in real time and to know about it when things come out. So going to maybe more of like a little bit of a practical use case here, we can also check out the VITs and the VULs. The vulnerability groups are ultimately what are going to be generated by your scan tool. So this is probably where you're going to be doing a lot of your work. So we add those same UI actions up here so that we can look up and see, what are the related VulnDB vulnerabilities? What vulnerabilities is VulnDB finding for this particular piece of software that's related to this vulnerability group? So if there are multiple different pieces of software that are implicated in this vulnerability group, depending on how your organization has grouping rules set up, they'll all show up in this list, and then it will link out to that more detailed view, so that you can get a little bit more of a view into what's actually going on in this vulnerability group. And then same with the product analysis, where we can get that high level view of the products that are being implicated here. So this one, we can take a look at the total cost of ownership Flash player, which is obviously pretty common. But going a little bit further down, we can then get that same functionality in each of the individual VITs, where this VIT just out of box doesn't actually have threat and solution data associated to it, but then we can pull up the related VulnDB data, and then we can see all the different vulnerabilities that are associated to this piece of software. But then drilling into those, then we can see the solutions. So there's like the missing kind of threat and solution data here. You can also, since this data is not actually in the NVD, or since there is a decent amount of data in here that's not in the NVD, these VulnDB exclusives, what you could potentially do is the SAM NVD detection. And this is actually going to be pretty slow. I'm not sure how much I'll be able to show this because there's a lot of churn that kind of goes on in the system when this happens. But basically, once you have this enabled, then you can check out those vulnerable items. But basically, you can go into a vulnerable software record, and when you're taking a look at those, you have this software discovery model field. And so if this was a vulnerability that you absolutely cannot have in your environment, what you can do is you can link this to a discovery model in your environment. Scripting is probably the better way to do this. You're probably not going to want to do this on a manual basis. But once you have selected a software discovery model and put it in here, and then you save it, it will generate, once you have the NVD detection turned on, it'll generate those VITs and VULs for you. So basically, whenever an installation of this software is found, it would generate a new VIT for that. And then if there isn't an open vulnerability group, then it would create those based on your vulnerability grouping rules. So I think that's a pretty powerful piece of functionality that enables you to really monitor some of this exclusive data that may not be picked up by your scan tool. You know, if your vulnerability scanner, if it exclusively relies on the NVD data, then all of those VulnDB exclusives aren't going to be detected. And so this is one way to potentially monitor for that. Pretty much sums up what I was wanting to demo today.
Jay, I know I get asked quite a bit, effectively, what is the subscription for ServiceNow that I need? I know the setup is built to be super easy, but maybe one more time, just letting everyone know what they need from a ServiceNow infrastructure in order to do it would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. You primarily need the vulnerability response module. So once you've got this enabled, that's going to give you all the tables that I've been showing you, you know, the third-party vulnerabilities, vulnerable items, vulnerability groups, and, you know, the SAM NVD detection, all the various business rules, et cetera, that, you know, that work under the hood and the table structure that gets populated by the VulnDB vulnerability integration. The integration itself is free to all VulnDB subscribers. So really, you know, once you have, you know, that subscription set up, you can just head over here to the store and you can type in VulnDB and you can just click get here, put in your credentials, and then secure an entitlement to all your instances to check it out. Thanks everybody for joining today. Definitely, you know, head over to the store and check out the integration. And yeah, I hope this can help you, you know, improve your vulnerability response program on ServiceNow.